Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Focus on K-12, EdTech, and the Education Experience. I'm your host, Doug Konopelko, Education Strategist at CDWG. Today, I talked to Glen Irvin Flores about his work with game-based learning and gamification and how that impacts his life as a teacher and instructional coach. Let's dive in.
My name is Glen Irvin, and I am now an instructional technology coach. Before that, I was a Spanish teacher, and I have a real passion for specifically game-based learning.
Awesome. So, game-based learning. I've also heard a lot about, gaming, gamification. How is game-based learning? What sets game-based learning apart from those other two?
I think we start with gamification first. First of all, there's nothing wrong with it. Some people are anti-gamification, and I'm not one of those people. I actually used it in my classroom too, but just basically using game elements, for example, like using XP points, experience points in your class versus just using regular points, using gaming elements to layer things on top of your classroom, even like theme, change the names of assignments and those types of things, and many more things you could do with gamification. Game-based learning is specifically using either a commercial game, so something that was not meant for education, or an education game actually in your classroom. So it could be as simple as using games that we are all kind of used to, like quiz show games like Kahoot, but as diverse as using something that was never meant for specifically for education, and then pulling it into your classroom and then being able to develop lessons that coincide with whatever your objectives are.
Okay, great. So how does a Spanish teacher, a world languages teacher for 2 decades, end up developing this passion for game-based learning to the point where this is the thing? I think when we talk, when I see you at conferences, this is Glenn's thing now, right? Is game-based
Yes.
learning and having these conversations. So how did that develop?
It started off just very simply with I was doing some things in my classroom, and they had to do basically with gamification elements. And one of my colleagues basically mentioned that there was a professor out there teaching courses, graduate courses on basically exploring teaching and learning in virtual worlds. Actually, I think that was the name of the course. And in that course, we basically learned about game-based learning, and we were students of his, but we were all meeting inside of Minecraft. And this was probably now 7 or 8, 9 years ago. And that professor is Dr. Chris Haskell. And anyway, he pushed us to say, what can we do with this environment? What is possible with this? And I started kind of exploring, like anybody does on the internet, to see, okay, what has someone else already done? And then I can base some things off of that. And there wasn't a lot done in language learning. So I was like, well, let's start from the beginning and kind of emulate some lessons that I saw for social studies teachers, some things that even math and science teachers were doing, and kind of pivot it to be able to say, how can we learn a language using this 3D environment? That's such an immersive environment, such a open sandbox world where you can just basically do anything. And so we started creating and developing lessons, as part of my assignments, basically in that class. So it was super inspirational, and I saw other people, other of my classmates creating things, and then I just continued to push me to not only develop the lessons, but I wanted to publish them publicly. So as I was creating things, I would post on social media and on YouTube. I created the lesson plans, and then I just started kind of archiving all of those lessons too in a document, and just saying, well, if someone else wants to try this, at least they can kind of get some ideas and some inspiration on how they could possibly go ahead and use it for language learning.
Yeah, I always love when I'm talking to a teacher or an administrator, and they have these sort of adult learning moments with teachers still, right? Like we still have, as a teacher, still have these great teachers, right, that help us improve our practice. So love the work with Dr. Haskell there. So two questions from that, and we'll go to the first one, which is, do you still keep in touch with Dr. Haskell? Did you like pursue that more than that original class?
Yes, absolutely. So we kept in touch, and I've had the opportunity to be at some of the same conferences that he's been at. Usually he's like a keynote speaker, those types of things that I've been able to present. And even there was a moment that was kind of surreal where I was presenting a session on a Minecraft Education Edition from Microsoft, just came out at that moment. And I was doing a session at this conference that he was the keynote at. And he was one of the participants in my little session, and he was actually in the session and, kind of taking notes and whatever it might be, just smiling and along and nodding. And so it was kind of a surreal moment of me. I'm teaching this lesson to these educators of how do you actually use this, and Dr. Haskell sitting there as one of the participants. So yeah, he's always been an inspiration, and just many of the things. If you ever get to have an opportunity to speak to him or just even like read some of his stuff that he's actually put out there, and he has some YouTube videos and stuff, it just really pushes the boundaries of what's possible and just education in general. So that's what I needed to as an educator. I wanted to be like, okay, we can push the boundaries and we don't have to stay confined within this box. And this was just one of the ways to be able to do that.
I also love that, from that story and sort of embedded within that story for folks who maybe aren't as familiar, Minecraft was sort of, I don't want to say taken over by teachers, but like teachers found Minecraft, found the value to use it as a teaching tool. And then, Minecraft shifted and said, we need to build an education edition because there's a whole community of people who are clamoring for this. So I love when the market sort of follows that work, rather
Yes,
than somebody creating something and saying, like, trying to stuff it into education, right?
absolutely. Yeah. There was just this community that's already used basically the old vanilla version of the game for many purposes. They were already repurposing it. And then that's where the old Minecraft EDU before Education Edition even came out. So Microsoft knew what they were doing when made this giant purchase of Minecraft, just this video game. They also knew that there was this whole education segment that was ripe to explore because it was already kind of built up and there was already a lot of ideas out there, and then they just needed to go ahead and invest in it and then continue to push the limits of what's possible there.
All right. And then back to question 2 from before, which is, can you give me a few examples from either your own work as a Spanish teacher or from your current role as an instructional tech coach,
Yeah.
of game-based learning in action?
So as a teacher, I want to make sure I let everyone know that I started with some very, very simple things that would be possible to do within these little 50-minute segments that I had in my previous school, as far as a class period. So things like using pixel art to teach numbers and colors. Then we started just using the 3-dimensional environments of Minecraft, not even building inside of it, but just kind of to explore. And then the students would pretend and role play to be real estate agents and be able to explore these little towns that were already there. And they're there, by the way, everybody. There's all kinds of worlds that you can just go ahead and basically download and use them in your classes, to be able to explore and then find the correct home for a client that has specific needs, and then be able to go ahead and sell the client on this home by describing it and say, oh, you really want this home. It seems to have this many bedrooms, it has a pool, etc. And so the kids are communicating, but just using this kind of 3-dimensional environment. And then finally, really pushing the limits and saying, is it possible to just meet every single day, kind of like Dr. Haskell did with us, and actually learn the Spanish language in an immersive environment like Minecraft? And so I have some lessons basically that I spent over a 9-week period with my upper level Spanish students, where we played the game and role played ourselves too as Spanish speakers in this kind of world that we call it El Mundo de Leyendas. And each week there was just basically a set of adventures that the students went on, quests, let's call them, that they participated in. And all they were doing basically was playing a game, but staying and speaking communicating in the Spanish language, which really kind of pushes the limits of what's even possible. So that was just an experiment just to see if it was possible to go ahead and do that, and it is. And so I can't even imagine like all of the different things that some people will come up with in the future of how this might actually change the way that language learning even takes place as far as in classrooms.
I love that. It's like, we talk about when we're talking about language learning, having like total immersion in the language, right? So this is like immersion within an immersive world. It's getting pretty meta in your
Yes,
classroom.
absolutely. Yes.
So
I had a student, sorry, that he had a great quote for that I've used as far as in conferences. And he's in kind of one of the reflections at the end of class said, how did it go? Whatever might be, kind of the types of things that we ask as educators to our students. And he said that he was in the Dominican Republic for, I think a 6-week period doing some volunteer work during one of the summers of his junior year. And his senior year, he took my class and he said, it's the closest thing to being immersed in a Spanish speaking world is what we were creating as far as in this classroom. So it was, that was a great compliment then.
yeah, absolutely. So I'm sure you've gotten your lumps, your bumps, and your bruises along the way as well. So for folks who are maybe just starting out or who are just looking to get deeper into game-based learning, what are some of those common pitfalls that they might try to avoid along the way?
Number one, it's really easy to get fired up and excited about using game-based learning, but you need to take a step back and start off like anything with your outcomes and make sure that game-based learning is the best way to reach those goals, whether it be using Minecraft or something else. Whatever you're doing, you shouldn't use it because of the tool itself. That tool may not be appropriate for that. And that's my conversations that I've had with fellow educators as a coach now, that sometimes it isn't the right fit. It doesn't work with it, and it's trying to force it into that. It could be disastrous. Number two is it's super important to, in any kind of lesson planning, to chunk your lessons, but especially using game-based learning. You have to plan in your lesson that you're going to pause. You will take 15 minutes and then just pause everybody. And, games like Minecraft, the education edition, there's actually a pause button. You can freeze everybody up and get all the students' attention and redirect basically to make sure that you are focused on your outcome, because it's so easy, because the game is so immersive, to just get distracted by something else, to get derailed on something else. And that's okay, because that happens, but you want to make sure you kind of refocus and repoint them back at at those goals that you started with. And finally, the biggest lesson, and I luckily started with this because I started off by getting a grant to be able to purchase the licenses for this. But I started with communicating with all the stakeholders. Super important. Speak with obviously your admin, number one, before you even get started. Make sure that they are on board with this. And then your parents of your students. And then I would even suggest to go to your local newspaper and kind of tell them, hey, I have a great story for you. And most local newspapers are happy to print out these types of things and say, we're going to be trying this thing, and I want you to go ahead and talk about why we're doing this as far as at school. That way you're out ahead of any kind of people trying to detract from what you're trying to do, and say, no, this is why we're doing this. We're using this as an educational tool.
Fantastic. So along the way, I'm sure in addition to all these lessons learned, you've amassed a lot of resources, whether that's books, blogs, people that you work with or follow. What would you say are some of the most, those that have like the most impact on your work with game-based learning that other folks could get involved with?
For sure, anything by Dr. Chris Haskell. He's written all kinds of papers. And then, like I said, he even has some YouTube videos available there just to kind of explore, kind of push the boundaries of game-based learning. There is a gentleman that works at the University of Northern Colorado. His name is Dr. Matt Farber. And he wrote a book called Gamify Your Classroom. And it's a field guide to game-based learning. And what's really cool about this book is it has lessons that break down everything from gamification. So you can really kind of sense what is that, to all the way to pushing the boundaries of game-based learning and using games as far as in the classroom. Um, Read anything by Michael Matera if you want to learn more about gamification, how to do it effectively, even all the way down to the elementary classroom. And blog posts, there's two guys that I would read everything from them. There's a gentleman, his name is Chris Avilas, and he goes by the Teched Up Teacher, and he's techedupteacher.com. And also there's another gentleman in Canada, his name is Paul Darvasi, and his blog posts are ludiclearning.org. And he does all of this stuff on even pushing the boundaries of other things like alternate reality gaming and kind of really role playing as far as in your classrooms, and lessons galore that are shared there about what's possible to do in your classroom, specifically in this case, I think in language arts.
Perfect. Well, Chris has been a guest, so we'll have a link to his video somewhere, or also
Nice.
below in the description. I'll make sure that link to those other resources get in the description as well. Glenn, thank you so much for spending some time and sharing your passion with us today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks for joining us today on Focus on K-12 EdTech and the Education Experience. If you enjoyed today's show, please feel free to like, subscribe, and click the little bell so that you get notified whenever we post a new episode. Or reach out to me on Twitter @dconopelco. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time as we focus on K-12.